let's move on now because the Cuban authorities have taken a hard line after the biggest anti-government demonstrations in 30 years. After thousands took to the streets in the capital Havana and other cities across the country, police used pepper spray and beat some of the protesters. The crowds are unhappy with food shortages, high prices and the authorities' handling of the COVID pandemic. Well, Cubans have been angered by the collapse of the economy. Last year, Cuba's state-controlled economy shrank by 11%. Now, that's its worst decline in almost 3 decades. It's been pretty hard hit by the pandemic too. And of course, those US sanctions imposed by the Trump administration. More than 200 new sanctions were imposed on the island's economy during Trump's tenure. And the Biden administration, well, they haven't lifted any of them. Protesters are also angry at a shortage of vaccines as the country reports a record of nearly 7,000 daily infections and 47 deaths on Sunday alone. That's twice as many as the previous week. Tanya Dendrinos sent this report.
Chanting for freedom. Not a cry often heard in Havana. Cubans took to the streets in what the opposition has called the biggest anti-government protests in almost 3 decades.
State security beat me and my daughter. They beat us because we were walking down the street.
We are here because of the repression against the people. They are starving us to death. Havana is collapsing. We have no house, we have nothing. But they have money to build hotels and they have us starving.
Demonstrations were also held in Florida, where the Cuban exile community showed its solidarity. Cuba's president has blamed the United States for the unrest, laying down a threat for anti-government protesters.
We came here to show, together with the revolutionaries of this town, that here the street belongs to the revolutionaries. No worm or mercenary will claim the streets, and if they provoke us, without violating their constitutional rights, we will confront them.
Words spurring on supporters of the communist government, some taking it upon themselves to surround and detain those demonstrating, while others staged counter-protests.
We are defending what we did 60 years ago, that this is ours, that it has cost many lives, that capitalism will never come back here again, and that these mercenaries, paid by the empire, will never again take our streets. They will have to kill us all first.
Demonstrations of this kind are rare in Cuba, but as the country reports a record number of coronavirus infections, tensions are boiling over and cries for democracy are growing. Tanya Dendrinos, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined now by Ana Maria Aurora from BBC Mundo. And Ana Maria, protests like this obviously happened around 30 years ago. The economy then was an issue, but I guess things have been more complicated this time by the coronavirus pandemic and the perceived handling of it by the government.
Yes, I would say the coronavirus crisis is one of the main factors in these situations. In the last days, we saw people sharing videos on social media of people dying at home or without proper medical assistance. And that went viral on social media accounts in the island. And this is actually another main factor that now Cuban people has this access to social media, and that has become a kind of a way to gather and to coordinate these kind of actions as these protests that we are seeing now. We are talking about more than 20 cities and villages in the country that spontaneously, they say, went out to protest against the government, against the economic situation and the sanitary situation. Let's not forget that Cuba is now, after dealing very well with the pandemic, with the pandemic, dealing with the worst of the situation they have so far, with records of high numbers of about 7,000 new cases each day of coronavirus. So this is one of the main factors, definitely, of this new protest in the island.
Okay, so it's clear that people are unhappy. These protests are, comparatively big, but what's the next step? Where are these protests going to go? Without military support, which is, highly, highly unlikely, what do these protesters actually want to see happen, and how likely is it what they want will happen?
I mean, I think it's too early to say, and we have to see what is going to happen next, because yesterday we saw a protest, but also a brutal repression against the persons that were on the streets. And we have also the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, calling the people that are defending the revolution or with the government to come out on the streets and to try to confront these protesters. So the uncertainty, I think, is the right word for the situation that we have right now. But we have to say that the number of people that are on the streets, that we can count for thousands. And I think also we have a protest from the east to the west of the country. And this is something really with no precedence after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959.